The Galactic Empire is for all intents and purposes the textbook villain in the Star Wars universe. It's an autocratic regime that forces compliance in its citizens through fear and intimidation. But why exactly does the Empire behave in this way? And what would happen if the Empire wasn't quite so evil? Now, when discussing why the Empire is evil, there is one key factor behind this. Why it treats its citizens so terribly, why it pushes an anti-alien agenda, and why it simply removes problematic people from its citizenship. And ultimately, all of these revolve around its military. You see, the Empire exists on one of the oldest governing principles throughout history, and that is you can only hold on to power if you are the strongest entity around. Now, when I say power, I'm not talking about the most popular, or even the wealthiest. I'm talking about tangible military power. The Empire is an autocracy, however, it lasted little over 20 years. I mean, there's countless real-world examples of leaders who ruled through military might alone for far longer than this. The Empire's need for this super strong military revolves around a need to maintain a status quo. However, the Empire's status quo is very much Palpatine can do whatever he wants. As is common throughout history, conquering factions such as the Empire always begin incredibly harshly, often being nothing more than a terror or police state. However, unlike most real-world examples, the Empire never really relaxed this policy or culture of overwhelming force. It never allowed society to function and evolve under it. It maintained this terrifying image, and it continued to subjugate its people arguably a lot longer than it really needed to. Realistically, if Palpatine took control of the first couple of years, was the super strict authoritarian, before somewhat relaxing his regime, I believe it would have remained in power for far longer. Of course, it didn't. It continued to build up its strength. Enough just was never enough. There was colossal fleets simply capable of wiping out all life on a world, countless soldiers to enact war across the galaxy, but again, it was just never enough. Really, the Empire's failure lies in its inability to see reason. So why is this? Well, if Palpatine chose to build up his massive military, even just for the first decade, then the Empire would have still been the unquestionable superpower in the galaxy. It inherited that. Even when it was first founded, it took over from the Republic, which was still the galaxy's superpower. The simple fact of the matter is that it didn't need to imprison farmers to seize their land, it didn't need to have such extortionately high taxes on its people, and it didn't need to force unrealistic demands on its citizens. But it did, so it could keep building up its military, it could keep becoming stronger and stronger. Really, it's a story of greed. This not only created huge amounts of conflict and forced it to turn on its own people and its people to subsequently turn on it, but also it's similar to throwing down the gauntlet in a way. This entity is only going to get stronger and stronger. So naturally, people who did oppose it were more desperate to oppose it now as opposed to later, whilst they still had a chance. So what would have happened if, instead of this, the Empire decided to not follow this frankly stupid goal of limitless power, and instead decided to focus more on domestic issues? Now, for this rethink, we're still going to be saying that the Empire is a terror state. We're still going to be saying it's an autocracy. We're just going to be saying that it's one more of moderation. So first things first, we're going to say that the Death Star is scrapped. We've talked about this utterly ridiculous project in a lot of videos, and I think we can all agree it really was a huge mistake. As well as this, there is no known entity outside of the galaxy, such as the Yuzong Vong, that technically exist in canon, so the idea that Palpatine was building up his massive military to fight them isn't going to be something that we're going to be considering. So what does this mean? Well, firstly, the Empire isn't going to be any less powerful. It's still going to have massive fleets of capital ships, hordes of troops big enough to subjugate the entire galaxy. In fact, we may even see a bit of a stronger and smarter Empire. It's far more likely that if Palpatine chose to limit the budget of the military and navy, they would be a lot more careful with what they were spending it on. They would be more incentivized to invest in better choices, such as Thrawn's TIE Defender program. So the Empire can still be this all-seeing, looming police state. It's just one of a little bit more moderation, where they're not wasting huge amounts of money on things that they just don't need. This has a lot of important repercussions. They no longer have to bully their citizens due to the need for finance and materials. Instead, they can just use a lot of their savings from easing on military spending and use it to invest in other domestic projects. Outer Rim territories could be developed, farms could be given technology to increase crop yield, factories could invest in better research and technology, humanitarian aid would repair the damage that was still there from the Clone Wars, and other events to ensure these citizens became loyal and chiefly productive members of Imperial society. You see, this is the thing that the Empire never really got. You have to spend money to make money. They invest, they see returns. They were too busy beating up their innocent people for every single last credit they have. And the thing is about this is these people didn't have a lot because the Empire had already taken away most of their means to make money. It really is flogging a dead horse. Now, assuming all this actually happened, what you would inevitably see was prosperity on a galactic scale, as citizens now have financial backing and the military backing of this superpower. They aren't only safe, but they're now being given resources to live more comfortable lives. And if the economy is thriving, the Empire is going to continue to make more money that it can use to spend on things like Star Destroyers and soldiers. We're looking at a far more powerful Empire in this scenario than we had in our own timeline. And this is the thing, even if Star Destroyers are looming overhead and you're living in a police state, if you see them for a force for good, no one actually cares. The Empire would be loved, Palpatine would be celebrated. Sure, you've got to deal with Imperial bureaucracy, and sure, your neighbour just got arrested for not quite showing enough enthusiasm over Empire Day. But generally speaking, the people are willing to look the other way, look on the brighter side during times of prosperity. Sure, it's not great, but at least battle droids aren't tearing down your house anymore. So we have to understand that if things are relatively comfortable for people in the Empire, they'll be willing to accept a lot of Palpatine's totalitarian ways. And this has a knock-on effect for the rebellion. Far less people would be willing to join because less people would want to. Without the manpower supporting it, the rebellion is more or less just a bunch of old senators who are annoyed because their powers were diminished after the Clone Wars, and there's no longer a democracy, which of course we know is a noble ideal, but at the end of the day, to a lot of people, they weren't big fans of it. Remember, the Empire was brought in on cheers, not boos. People in the galaxy were done with the Republic. They felt like it failed them. Ultimately, I believe that if the Empire had have learnt to have limited itself, if it just saw itself as a part of the galaxy as opposed to a subjugating force, then realistically it would have lasted so much longer and it would have been far more powerful due to the simple financial benefits that causes. Now, the thing is, inevitably, things do fall apart. Give it a few decades or even centuries, and people's comfort soon turns to discomfort. When times are good, people start to criticize other things. So, inevitably, an authoritarian regime during times of prosperity is on a limited time frame. The more comfortable people get, the more they want, and eventually they'd want a full-on democracy, so eventually there would almost definitely be an overthrowing of the Empire. That's just a tale of old as time. However, the Empire would have lasted far, far longer than it did in our timeline. But what do you guys think? Why was the Empire so obsessed with growing its strength beyond its needs? And how long do you think that the Empire could have lasted if it just showed a little bit more compassion and tactics when planning how it was going to rule the galaxy? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, I do hope that you enjoyed. If so, please remember to like, share and sub, as it's really appreciated and it helps the channel grow. Thank you for bearing with me. I know videos have been coming out not very recently. Again, very, very busy time of year for me. I do apologise, but I do appreciate you all being so understanding with it. Please don't forget to follow me on Twitter at The Lore Guy to get regular updates on when I am uploading, and don't forget to check the bell to make sure that you don't miss out on any content that I do release. But most importantly, thank you so much for watching. I really do hope that you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.